Hello guys, welcome everybody to another episode of our podcast. In today's episode we're going to continue Pride Special and I'm going to talk about HIV. Let's go! Hello, welcome everybody once again. Today I'm gonna talk about HIV, which for years have been linked to the gay community. And obviously, today we're aware that sexual identity has nothing to do with HIV. However, men who have sex with men are still a key population when it comes to HIV and AIDS, meaning that there is an overrepresentation of this population among those infected. And I'm saying men who have sex with men on purpose because when I say gay people or gay men, that's not really proper because not only gay men have sex with men. So I'm going to use men who have sex with men to indicate all people who identify as men and have sex with other people who identify as men. But clearly, because there's an overrepresentation of this population among people who are infected, there is a need to educate people on HIV prevention and treatment to limit the exposure and transmission in this group. But before we get to the population itself, let's talk about what the HIV is. The HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. It is a virus that attacks the body's immune system, specifically the CD4 cells, which are the type of white blood cell that plays a critical role in maintaining the immune response. So the CD4 cells are they're like cleaning service to our body, which prevents us from develop serious infections. And CD4 cells' job is to fight infections and remove them from our body. Remove the virus particles from our body. However, the HIV is quite clever, and it can kind of trick the CD4 cells into its game. Without getting into details about the exact HIV multiplication process, all you need to know is that virions, which are single virus particles, they can force CD4 cells to produce next HIV particles. So they can trick CD4 cells, those which are supposed to fight off the infection, to produce more HIV cells. That's quite clever. And when this process is left untreated, more HIV cells are produced, they attack more CD4 cells, and growing number of HIV particles lowers the number of CD4 cells, because the HIV is attacking CD4 cells which are producing new HIV particles. And by the way, a number of HIV cells in the blood is called viremia, and the viremia level is used to assess the severity of the disease, and also it is used to assess the response to treatment. So monitoring the level of viremia, so the level of numbers of HIV cells in the blood, it helps us to see how people are responding to treatment. And declining number of CD4 cells is related to worsened immunity, and when this state is not properly addressed, eventually it leads to death, because the body is not able to fight the simplest infection. However, thanks to the numerous ways of treatment, this process can be easily stopped and reversed, but I will talk about it in a minute. Now, the question is, how can we acquire HIV? Generally, there are three ways of getting infected. The first one is called the vertical transmission, or it is also called mother-to-child transmission. And this happens when a pregnant HIV-positive woman, so the woman who is infected, is not treated during pregnancy. And the virus is transmitted during pregnancy and delivery and possibly when breastfeeding. However, I need to say that there's not enough data on transmission through breastfeeding. We can suppose that it is the way of transmitting HIV, but there's really not enough data. But in general, HIV positive women are recommended avoiding breastfeeding. However, in the world regions with high risk of famine, women do feed newborns because the risk of transmission of HIV is much lower than the risk of death due to starvation. So in very poor regions, especially regions of Africa, even HIV positive women do breastfeed their babies. The second way of HIV transmission is blood-related way, and we can acquire the virus if the sufficient amount of blood from an HIV positive person gets onto our mucous membrane. So for instance, into the mouth, eyes, nose, or onto the open scars. And here's the super important thing. Transmission is related to the amount of virus particles and the time of exposure. So after blood gets into our mouth or eyes, it is necessary to wash it as soon as possible to limit the time of exposure. And now, the second most important thing, please do not wash your eyes or scars with, let's say, aggressive liquids. Do not wash it with alcohol-based cleaners or anything like this. Use just water or soap and water. Because if you use that so-called aggressive active substances, you kind of wide open the door for virus. Because you irritate your skin, and the HIV is getting more easily into your body. So HIV outside of the body is pretty weak, so warm water and soap is just more than enough to kill it. And finally, the third way of transmission is sexual contact. And now there's always a question, what kind of sexual contact is the most risky, and what is the so-called safe intercourse? But before we get to the least and the most risky sexual contact, let's think about, just for a while, let's think about how it is transmitted and what are the factors that impact the risk. When it comes to the sexual contact, the fluids that are of interest are usually blood, sometimes, precum, semen, and vaginal discharge. And HIV is not in tears, it's not in sweat, it's not in saliva. So when whichever fluid with HIV particles meets the mucous membrane, there is a risk of getting infected. It doesn't mean, however, that each unprotected contact between HIV positive and HIV negative person leads to infection. No. Our immune system is able to fight off some infections, but not always. And now the two factors that are the most important in assessing the risk of infection is time of exposure and the area, usually the area of mucous membrane, that was in contact with the virus. So let's start with the oral sex. As I said before, HIV is not in saliva. So the person who is, let's say, actively working with their mouth cannot transmit the infection onto the partner. So when this person is HIV positive, this person cannot transmit the HIV onto the partner. When we change the perspective and analyze the situation when the person is, when the second person is HIV positive, technically, HIV particles can be found in precum and semen or vaginal discharge, but the mucous membrane of the mouth has some extra layer of saliva, which serves as a barrier between HIV and the mucous membrane. So in this case, the risk of getting infected is relatively low. So we can say that oral sex is quite safe. We can never say that it's 100% safe, but it is, from this perspective, quite safe. The risk can be a bit higher when you have oral sex right after brushing your teeth, because when you brush your teeth manually, you can sometimes irritate the gums, and this can increase the risk of being infected. Also, the same thing is linked to washing mouth with Listerine or other alcohol-based liquids. So it's better to avoid it right before oral sex. And some people might ask what to do if they have semen or pre-cum in their mouth, whether they should swallow it or spit out. Well, it doesn't really matter. Either way is fine. If you swallow it, you don't increase the risk. So it's okay. If you spit it out, it's also okay. So it doesn't really matter. Now let's go down and think about the vaginal intercourse. I'm going to start with women who have sex with women, because there are two vaginas in this case. And usually, in the case of two women, there is no direct exposure to vaginal discharge. So the road to infection is longer as compared to the intercourse between man and woman. However, there is a chance to transmit the virus manually, or there's even greater risk to transmit it while using the same sex toys during the same intercourse. So if you do it, if you're a woman and you have sex with a woman and you use sex toys to penetrate your partner and later you change roles, try not to do it. It's safer to wash it before you change positions or change roles, or use condoms. Otherwise, you may transmit HIV or syphilis, HPV or hepatitis virus, and several more infections which are not really pleasant to cure. So try not to do it. However, still, the risk of HIV transmission between two women by sexual intercourse is virtually non-existent. It's extremely low. When it comes to man-woman intercourse, women are unfortunately in a worse position when the man is HIV positive, of course. First, because HIV can be in pre-cum and semen, so there is some amount of possibly infectious matter. And second, the inner layer of vagina is approximately the size of a tissue, so it's relatively big. The mucous membrane inside is relatively big. And if semen with HIV particles meets the mucous membrane of a vagina, there is also no way to wash it away. So the exposure is by nature longer. And virus particles can just, let's say, roam around the body with impunity. So therefore, the risk of getting HIV is higher. When we switch the roles and now analyze the HIV positive women and HIV negative men, so now the woman is that person who can transmit the HIV, the risk is a bit lower because the area of exposure, the mucous membrane of a penis, is extremely small compared to the mucous membrane of the vagina. And the mucous membrane of a penis is on the head of it, just right on the tip of the penis. So this is really small size. Small size of mucous membrane. Plus, you can easily wash away vaginal discharge right after sex. However, even though the risk is lower, still there is a chance to transmit the virus onto the male partner. So always, if you're not sure about your partner, so just always use protection. The last one way of contact that is left is the anal intercourse. In this case, all genders are comparably exposed when it comes to the passive partner. And similarly to the vaginal intercourse, in the anal sex, the mucous membrane of the anus is relatively big. It is usually not moist enough to enable the comfortable intercourse, so to avoid irritation of the skin, a significant amount of lubricate should be used, because repetitive rubs and friction can cause the mucous membrane irritation, and this increases the risk of transmission tremendously for both partners. Also, when semen or precum is inside the anus, washing it away is not that easy, so the time of exposure is also pretty long, which, of course, just like I said before, the time of exposure increase the risk of infection. When it comes to the active partner, the risk of acquiring HIV is linked more to the blood than to bodily fluids. So due to insufficient lubrication of anus, the rubbing and friction might cause damages or micro damages of a skin on the penis, and of course the skin of the anus. And this makes the anal sex the riskiest of all sexual intercourse. And that's why using protection is so crucial, especially in the gay community, because as research suggested, anal sex is the most popular way of sexual intercourse in the gay community. So that's why using protection is so crucial in this community. And also that's why HIV was so quickly and easily transmitted in this group in the mid-80s. However, the good news is that enormous amount of money has been spent on research on HIV, and not only can these be easily diagnosed, but also it can be almost completely cured. Well, it cannot be entirely eradicated from the body, but we call it functional removal. Let's begin with the prevention. The cheapest and most easy way of prevention is, of course, condom. This gives us 100% of protection given it's properly used. And the additional benefit of condoms is protection against other sexually transmitted infections, such as syphilis, gonorrhea, hepatitis viruses, and so on. If you are allergic to latex, because some people might be allergic to latex, and can't use the traditional ones, there are condoms made of different materials, so you just have to look for them. Another way of protection against HIV is PrEP, which stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. That is basically pharmacotherapy, so you take the pill with active treatment used traditionally in HIV treatment, but the amount of the active substance is usually a bit lower. However, even if it's lower, this substance protects you from getting HIV. So even if you have sex with someone who is HIV positive, when you are on PrEP, you wouldn't develop infection. Your body can get rid of the virus particles. This way of protection is recommended to sex workers who often have unprotected sexual contacts. It is also recommended to people who have sex with unsteady partners, or who are not the partners who are not tested, or they don't know if they have been tested. So basically it's recommended always when there's an elevated risk of getting HIV. And now some people might ask if they have to take PrEP for their whole life if they are in a relationship with an HIV positive partner. The answer is no, unless your partner is on treatment. I said before that we can't eradicate the virus completely from the body when the infection is developed. However, we can functionally treat HIV. When a person is on treatment, the medication which are used are reversing the process of virus multiplication. So in a nutshell, we force the CD4 cells, those I mentioned before, we force the CD4 cells to treat HIV like infection, not like a friend. So the HIV cannot use CD4 cells to multiply. And now, when a person continues treatment, the viral load, so the virus particles in the blood, are so sparse that there is no way to transmit HIV onto the partner, even when having an unprotected sex. If you want to know more about it, about these viral load, and in general, if you want to read about HIV, you can look up the Partner 1 and Partner 2 studies, which were conducted within male-female couples and male-male couples. And researchers observed these couples, and that's quite important. One person was HIV positive and the other person was HIV negative. And they didn't use condoms. And researchers observed how many infections happen within some time. And guess what? If the partner, the HIV positive partner, was on treatment, no infection was transmitted. So all HIV negative partners remained HIV negative, even if they had unprotected sex. Partner 1 and Partner 2 studies. You can also look up the Undetectable, Untransmittable campaign, and I will put the links under this episode. So if you want to know more about it, I recommend all these links so you can click and read and know more about HIV. And I hope this episode was helpful to you if you had questions or concerns about HIV. So thank you for today. Have a nice evening, have a nice day, or nice weekend, depending on when you're listening. And bye-bye, and until next time.